Well, we are making our way verse by verse through 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and just as it comes to us, we're tackling it, and we're taking a little hyphen here. We've made it through chapter 4. We had a part 1 week before last, and now we're in kind of part 2 of that study. And so my hope is this morning that you would have your pencils sharpened and ready to study God's Word. As my first and second grade teacher used to say, your thinking cap's on. Now, I have to say, every time I say that, it makes it sound like I got held back. And I got to just, small school, same teacher, okay. Put your thinking caps on. But these two books that we call them are actually letters. 1st and 2nd Thessalonians are letters that the Apostle Paul wrote to a church that he began on his second missionary journey. He planted this church in Thessalonica. He was with them, the Bible tells us, for 3 weeks. He had 3 weeks to pour into them, 3 weeks to teach them, 3 weeks to grow them and prepare them and get them started on their walk with God before he had to leave town. And my question is, what would you teach a group of new believers if you were Paul? If you had 3 weeks that you could just, these are the basics that you have to get down. These are the things that are vitally important and going to be instrumental in your walk with God. This is what you need to know. One of the things that Paul viewed as absolutely essential for this young church to get down was to have their minds be able to wrap around the flow of end-time events. This was essential to him. And so another question that I would pose to you is do you have a basic understanding of end-time events? Eschatology is the theological word, but of the word millennium, does that mean something to you? Tribulation, rapture, second coming? I don't say this like you should know, like pointing my finger, but what is your understanding? Because I know for myself, in the church that I grew up, and how charity grew up as well, it just wasn't talked about. I remember someone asking the pastor at a retreat, asking about, about the rapture and what's the millennium, and he says, hey, don't worry about any of that stuff. We're pan-millennialists. We don't need to worry about any of that because it's all going to pan out in the end. And that's cute. But that's certainly not Paul's attitude. It wasn't taught, and people didn't have an understanding of the flow of end-time events. And I'm not trying to criticize the church that I grew up in. These things just weren't talked about, but I'm sure that many of your experiences are the same way, that you are from a church or grew up in a church or your background, this just wasn't talked about. It's not really discussed, these end-timed things. And so maybe some folks out there can wrap their mind around it, but I just need to be focused on being neighborly, and I need to love my neighbor, and it is all going to pan out in the end, so I'm not going to worry about that stuff. But these things, Paul believes, were vitally important, and I believe I know he wanted the Thessalonians to understand these things about knowing God's plan. It brings hope and expectation and anticipation and comfort for the believer, and I think he wants us to experience that too. And so he begins, if you look at me in chapter 4, verse 13, the first words, this is a section we already looked at, but what he says right here, he says in verse 13, I don't want you to be ignorant. Now, we talked a little bit about this the last time we were together, but there's 5 times in the New Testament that Paul tells churches, he tells Christians, these are areas to not be ignorant in or not be unaware in, okay? 5 things that as a believer, you should have a basic understanding of these 5 things. And so I'm going to take a little parentheses right now, and we're going to look at these things. For the sake of time, I'm not going to turn to them. They are going to be up on the screen, but I encourage you to jot these down, get them down, study them on your own, and learn these things that Paul says we shouldn't be unaware of or ignorant of. And the first one is found in Romans 11, verse 25. That's the first time that Paul says, I don't want you to be ignorant. And he says, I don't want you to be ignorant or unaware that God has a plan and a purpose for the nation of Israel. He says, essentially, don't be wise in your own eyes and think that God is done with the nation of Israel. He is not done with Israel. They are temporarily living in this period of blindedness and disbelief and disobedience, but God is not going to turn his back on his promises to Israel. Then there's that great verse right after this that says the promises and the giftings of God are irrevocable, both to you and to the nation of Israel. He will never turn his back on these promises that we read in the Old Testament that I will do for his people. And so that's number one. Number two is found in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 1. And this is an understanding of the Old Testament and biblical typology or pictures and models and how that applies to our life. The events in the Old Testament that we read, they're not just historical events, they certainly are, but they're pictures of you and I's spiritual reality. He says in 1 Corinthians 10 that the Israelites were baptized into the Red Sea, just as we were baptized, right? And then he says they drank from that rock, and that rock was Jesus Christ. He says it's all pictures of your life as a believer. Those are examples from you to learn from. He says, don't be ignorant of this. Don't be ignorant about God's plan and purposes for the nation of Israel, and don't be ignorant of the Old Testament means for you. There's application there for you to have. Third, in 1 Corinthians 12, verse 1, Paul says, do not be ignorant of spiritual gifts. Faith, it's a gift of faith, healings, prophecy, tongues, the interpretation of tongues. Paul says, don't be ignorant about spiritual gifts, how they function, and what their purpose is. Doesn't want us to be ignorant about that. Fourth, he says in 2 Corinthians 2, verse 11, don't be ignorant about spiritual warfare. Satan is after you. Every single person in this room, he is after you. He wants to take advantage of you. He wants you to believe lies about yourself. He wants you to believe lies about your situation, and he does not take a day off. So do not be unaware. Do not be ignorant, he said, of Satan's devices and his methods, and do not be unaware of your resources in Jesus Christ. Fifth, and finally, this passage here. Paul says, don't be ignorant about this. Don't be ignorant about end-time things. The resurrection, the rapture. But here's the thing, guys. Those are the 5 areas that he says, I don't want the church can't be ignorant. They can't be unaware about these things. Aren't these the 5 areas that Christians are often the most confused about? The very things that churches and denominations and groups shy away from, oftentimes discussing. Oh, the nation of Israel, well, it's a nice ally for us in the Middle East, and I'm sure it's important to know their history and their background, but God's done with them. He's moved on from them. They've turned their back on Jesus, and so they don't really matter anymore. Old Testament pictures and typology, we're in Ezekiel on Wednesday nights. Oh, that's too dry. That's too antiquated. There's nothing there for me. It wasn't written for us. It doesn't pertain to me. Spiritual gifts, tongues, words of wisdom, all that stuff is so controversial. There's folks on this side of the spectrum and folks on this side of the spectrum, and I'm just going to stay right here in the middle and not worry about that. I'm going to avoid that. Spiritual warfare. Well, that's scary. That's freaky talking about that stuff. I tried watching The Exorcist. That's not my thing, so I'll leave that to Hollywood and the experts. That's not for me. The rapture, end time things, the flow of end times. Too tricky, too hard to understand. I'll just focus on what I know I need to focus on, loving my neighbor. I'm not going to worry about all of that. But these are the very areas that Paul knew that Christians like you and I would become ignorant in. That's why he told us do not be ignorant. He doesn't say don't be ignorant about things. He's like, I know they're going to know this. These are things that are dangers of not getting down and knowing. And so Paul says here, what he views as essential is understanding the flow of end time events. Because a proper understanding of the end time death, rapture, how that all fits together, it brings comfort and it brings hope. You see, the church in Thessalonica, and we looked at this 2 weeks ago, they've been waiting on the Lord. They've been expectant for Jesus to return. But now, by the time Paul writes this, they've lost some loved ones. You know, Grandpa Jesse or whatever has passed away. And is he going to get left behind? Did he miss out on glory? Is he excluded from the promises of God because he's not going to be alive when Jesus comes back? And so the church in Thessalonica, real living, breathing human beings like you and I, they're discouraged, they're confused, they don't know what to make of all of this. And so Pastor Paul here says, I don't want that for you. He says, I don't want you, verse 13, to be ignorant, brethren. And now let's just read this through the rest of the chapter. I don't want you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning those who have fallen asleep or who have died, lest you sorrow as others who have no hope. For the believer, for the Christian, death doesn't mean hopelessness for us. He says, verse 14, for if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, God will bring with him those who sleep in Jesus. And this is why I don't want you to be ignorant, because there's hope for those who have died, and there's hope for the living. This is a hopeful thing. For this we say, verse 15, to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will by no means precede those who are asleep. Those who have died, they're already ahead of us. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. So don't worry about Grandpa Jesse or whatever. He isn't missing out. He's already with the Lord. Verse 16, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain, we shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And thus we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore, comfort one another with these words. Paul says, don't worry, people have died. Don't worry, they're not missing out. They're with the Lord. We're not going to precede them. We're not going ahead of them. They're already with Jesus. And we who are alive, when the trumpet of God sounds, we're going to be caught up. Now, again, we talked about this a little bit week before last. If you weren't here, I encourage you to go look at that teaching. This is part 2. But that word caught up is the Greek word harpazo. And in Latin, it's raptus. It's where we get the term rapture. But the word means pulled up, grabbed, snatched away. That's what that word means. And so what he says here is when that moment happens and the trumpet of God sounds, we who are alive, we're going to get caught up and we're going to get raptured up. Now, 1 Corinthians 15 is a real great passage to write in your margins here. 1 Corinthians 15 says we're going to be changed when this happens, those who are alive and remain. We're going to be metamorphosized is what it says. It says we shall not all sleep. We're not all going to die, but we're all going to change in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. Those who have died, they're going to receive their resurrection bodies when that trump sounds. And we who are alive and remain, we're going to be changed, metamorphosized, and we're going to receive our resurrection bodies, so to speak. So, maybe you're already like, this is not what I thought Sunday morning was going to be like. Maybe this, you like, for me, that this end times eschatology type stuff is kind of a gray area for you. You've never really looked at these things in church before. I get it. That's how I grew up. So we're going to have a little end times crash course here this morning. And so this is why you need your thinking caps on. And so we're going to start with a couple events to define. There's a lot of events and things we could talk about in talking about the end times. We could talk about the millennial reign, the sheep and goats judgment, the white throne judgment. We could talk about the lake of fire. We could talk about the Antichrist, the abomination that causes desolation, all of those things. But this morning we're going to set that aside, okay? And we're just going to look at where the rapture, this catching up of those who are alive and remain, where that fits into all of this. Now, I've already described that word, rapture, this moment when the church is caught up in the air. And our second word to define here is the second coming. This refers to the time that Jesus comes back to the earth in glory with the church, with his saints, to rule and reign in justice and peace. And so the rapture, if you're more visual thinkers, the rapture is when the church goes up to heaven. The second coming is when Jesus and the church come from heaven to earth. The third word I want us to just get a working definition of is tribulation. It's a 7-year period of time where judgment is poured out on a Christ-rejecting, sinful world. And this can be read about in Revelation 6 through 19. It's the scary part of Revelation. That's the tribulation. And the events of the tribulation are like nothing the world has ever seen before, okay? It's not just like 2020 woke up on the wrong side of the bed. It's much, much worse than that. It's like hell on earth. There's demon, locusts, all of that stuff is included in this. Now, all fundamental Christian groups believe these three things, okay? About the rapture, and we just read it. It's in Scripture. The second coming. Jesus is coming back to the earth. And there's going to be a period of tribulation, okay? All Christians believe those things are going to happen. The question is what is the order and the timing of these events? How does the rapture, the tribulation, and the second coming all fit together? And this is exactly what Paul didn't want them to be ignorant of. Now, churches and denominations and groups are all over the board on this, but there's basically, to generalize, there's basically 3 views concerning the timing of the rapture. We have a way to, for those, again, for visual learners, we have a little visual here. There's pre-tribulation, mid-tribulation, post-tribulation. That's pretty self-explanatory, right? The pre-tribulation rapture view says the rapture, this being snatched away, this being grabbed up, happens before the 7-year tribulation period, this unprecedented time of judgment on the earth. Right before all that comes down, the saints go up, the church goes up, and we're caught to meet the Lord in the air. The mid-tribulation rapture view, or another newer variation, is called pre-wrath. That's a very kind of new way of looking at this. There's a man named Marv Rosenthal that wrote a book in 1990 that promotes this. But the mid-trib view is that the rapture is going to take place in the midst of that 7-year period, either at the 3.5 years, or some would say the 64-month portion of it. And then so we go up in the middle of the tribulation finishes, and then we come back with Jesus at the second coming. And then there's the post-tribulation view, that the church, the saints, are going to go through this entire 7-year period of God pouring out his wrath, and then we're going to be changed and taken up, and then return immediately with Jesus, just up and down, kind of like a bungee jump type of thing. We're just going up and right back down. And so I'm generalizing these viewpoints for the sake of time, but this is the gist of it. Pre-tribulation, before the 7 years, mid-tribulation or pre-wrath in the middle of that 7-year period, or post-tribulation after this 7-year period. Now, as I said, most of us, maybe this is more than you ever heard in church before about these things, and we've never really dived into this. And it can be a little intimidating to try to figure it out. But this is something that Paul wrote the church about. He wanted the church to understand because he knew there was hope available in it. And so that's my desire as well, that we would have an understanding and find hope in it. These three views, there's good scholars, very good scholars, and people that love Jesus in each of these categories, and they all can make compelling cases. I don't think it has to be something that divides the church. There's folks here at Calvary Chapel, Ellensburg, that have all three of those views. There's someone after the second service, like, I want to sit down and talk to you about this. Like, okay, yeah, that's fine. But the position of Calvary Chapel is pre-tribulation. And personally, for myself, I started in one camp, but as I studied the scripture, this is where I've come to. And the more I study this, the more convinced I am of it, that the church is snatched away from the earth before this tribulation period. And so we're going to look at that and what a difference that makes in our life. And so if you believe something else, it's totally fine. It's absolutely, I have no problem with you. But on the way up, I'm going to give you side eyes like, I told you, like, should have listened. So, this morning, I want to share literally just a few reasons, and I think there's dozens of reasons, but I want to give you a few on why I believe and why I think it's biblical and you should believe in a pre-tribulational rapture view, and then we're going to talk about why that's important at all. So, if you're ready, get your hands out. Someone said in the first service they were getting cramps. Reason number one to believe in a pre-tribulational rapture. It's the only view that's comforting. He says here, comfort one another with these words. He says the same thing in chapter 5. It would not be comforting if the rapture takes place at the end of tribulation or even in the middle of it. The only way for this to be a comforting doctrine is to have it be before the tribulation. It's not, and if those of you who've never studied Revelation, it's not comforting to hear that the only way that any one of you would ever have a chance of going to heaven today is your untimely death. Oh, wow, okay. Or if the Lord tarries, well, then you'd have to go through the most difficult and challenging times the world has ever known. You'd have to experience things so horrific that the book of Revelation says people are going to be begging to die. It's not comforting to say, oh, you're going to wish you were back in 2020. It's not comforting to say the Pacific Ocean is going to turn to blood, that there's going to be massive world topographical earthquakes taking place that changes the shape of the earth, and that if you don't get sucked in by the Antichrist and the false prophet, and you happen to not take the mark of the beast, if you make it through all that or half of that, and you happen to still be alive, take comfort. No! That's not comforting. That's terrifying. And so the comfort is that it could be at any moment. It could be before I get to point number 2. It really could be any time that the Lord says, come on up. It's time to go. Yes, that's comforting. That's hopeful. It might be today. This is the only way that it's comforting. Number 2. No other view is comforting. Number 2, the purpose of the tribulation. The church is not appointed to wrath. This is the big one for me. This is the biggie. If you turn in your Bibles to Revelation chapter 6, and we know to consider the purpose of the tribulation, once we understand that why the tribulation is going to exist and what it means, it doesn't make any sense that Christians, that saints would experience the tribulation, because part of the purpose of the tribulation is God pouring out his wrath on a Christ-rejecting, sinful world. Now, the record of the tribulation, if you have your Bible there, it's, again, for you visual folks, the tribulation begins, the account of it, in chapter 6. The tribulation isn't done in chapter 6. It's not half over. It's just beginning. There's another 13 chapters after this. And so in chapters 4 and 5, the church is seen in heaven around the throne. Chapter 6 then unveils the Antichrist. The tribulation begins. Hell breaks loose. The whole earth is rocked. Islands are displaced. Mountains are leveled. All of that. And then look at chapter 6, verse 15. And the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, every slave and every free man, hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand? This is the beginning of the tribulation period. And right at the beginning of the tribulation period, the 7-year period of judgment on the earth, it's recognized by everyone. Rulers, the wealthy, civilian leaders, military leaders, slave and free, rich and poor, great and small, everyone. They all realize that what is going on in the world is so blatantly obvious. This is the wrath of God. There's no other explanation. It's God's wrath that the world is experiencing. And he says, and who's able to stand? Who's everyone's experiencing this, but who? It's you and me. We're able to stand. Why? Now turn back to 1 Thessalonians. Let's go to chapter 1, 1 Thessalonians 1, verse 9. So the whole world knows this is the wrath of God, rich, poor, all great, small, all of those. Who's able to stand? You and I, because we're not there. We're not part of this. 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 9 and 10. For they themselves declare concerning us what manner of entry we had to you, Paul says, and how you turned from God. Speaking to the Thessalonians, you turned to God from idols to serve the living and true God. Man, you guys have been repentant. You literally turned around from that and you got saved. You started serving God. And verse 10, to wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, even Jesus who delivers us from the wrath to come. The tribulation is God's wrath poured out on an unsaved, unrepentant world. But to the church here, he says, you are repentant. You're not part of that. You're not going to receive that wrath. Because when you place your faith in Jesus and you trust completely, not on your own works, not by doing certain things or certain attendance or any of those things, but when all of your trust, every bit of it, not one part of it, everything is placed on Jesus and what he did on the cross, you're saved from the wrath to come. That's what's happened here. Now, let's sneak ahead to chapter 5. Chapter 5, verse 9, and this is to me the verse, okay? Verse to underline, to put a square around, mark it in your neighbor's Bible, blame it on me. I don't care. It's important. 1 Thessalonians 5:9. Speaking to the church, those who are repentant, those who are saved, those who have turned from trying to do life on their own and trying their best and serving idols and all that other stuff, but trusting totally and completely on the cross of Christ. He says to those, God did not appoint us to wrath. Instead, what are we appointed to? But to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, that whether we wake or sleep, whether we're living or dead, we should live together with him. Therefore, here's again, comfort each other and edify one another just as you are doing. The Christian, those who have placed all their trust in Jesus Christ and not on themselves or any other idol, the Christian is not appointed to wrath. We're instead appointed to salvation, Paul says. The wrath that should be poured out on you and me for your sin, your idolatry, your self-effort, thinking you can get there on your own wickedness, the wrath that you have deserved for every wrong deed, thought, speech, action, everything that you've committed, it's been taken away because Jesus took that wrath for us. That's what we're saved from. We're saved from that wrath. He absorbed that, took it on himself on the cross, what you deserved. And so if we've turned to him, placed our faith completely in him, and we trust him, we choose to be led by him, then we're appointed for salvation, not to receive that. He took what we deserved, and he gave us his righteousness. That's a good deal. There's no more wrath to be poured out on us. Jesus took it all, every bit of it. Those who are not appointed to salvation, those who haven't made a decision, those who think they can still get to heaven by themselves, or they're following whatever idols of their own devices they are, those who won't trust Jesus completely with their lives, who choose not to follow him and have him take their sins, they're going to experience this day, the great day of the wrath of the Lamb. But if you believe, you don't have to go through the tribulation. God has already made you righteous. And for the Christian to say, I'm giving Jesus all my sin and wickedness, and I've received his righteousness, okay, this great transfer that happens when we place our trust in him. God has poured out the wrath we deserve on Jesus, okay? That's what it means to be a Christian. But if we say, okay, that happened, but now I have to go through the tribulation and receive the wrath of God. No, we don't. It's already been dealt with. We don't have to receive a double dose of wrath, okay? And so we can know the rapture takes place before the tribulation. One, because it's a comforting doctrine. There's no other way the rapture could be comforting. Two, the time of tribulation is God pouring out his wrath, but Christ has already bore that for us. Number three, it's not in God's nature to judge the righteous with the wicked. Now, if you're taking notes, you should write down Genesis 18 and 19 and 2 Peter 2 in your notes here. In Genesis 18, many of you know the story. Abraham is informed by the Lord that judgment was coming to Sodom and Gomorrah. And Sodom and Gomorrah had become so corrupt, so sinful, full of homosexuality and perversity and laziness and gluttonous and pride. They ignored the poor and the needy. It's gone so far that God said, the most merciful thing that I can do is to prevent them from storing up more judgment and more wrath to come. And so Abraham hears that the end is coming for Sodom and Gomorrah, that God's wrath is coming on them. And so Abraham hears this, Lord, hold on. He knows his nephew, his nieces, his sister-in-law, they're in Sodom. And so he knew that by destroying Sodom with righteous Lot in it, God, that's against your character. And so Abraham said to God in Genesis 18:25, far be it from you to do such a thing as this, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous should be counted as the wicked? Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? Since this is who you are, God, since you are a just and righteous God, Lord, before you pour out your judgment on Sodom, wouldn't you spare the city? And you guys know, for 50 people, if there's 50 righteous people there, would you spare the city? And the Lord says, okay, I'll spare it for 50. And Abraham's like, okay, well, what about 45? The Lord says, yeah, I'd spare it for 45 and 40 and 30 and 20. And finally, Abraham says, what about 10? Would you spare the city of Sodom if there's 10 righteous people there? And the Lord says, I would. And certainly at this point, Abraham thought there's got to be 10. Right? There's Lot, his wife, his daughters, they're married. He's got to have some type of influence in this ungodly environment. But as you know, there wasn't 10 righteous people in Sodom. God isn't going to spare the city. He is going to pour his wrath out. But before he does, and this is what I want us to take note of, in Genesis chapter 19, angels come to the city. They find Lot right before the judgment's poured out, and it says the angels took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, the hands of his two daughters, the Lord being merciful to him, and brought him out and set him outside the city. Lot and his wife and his two daughters were supernaturally pulled up, snatched up from the city before God poured his wrath out on the city. And then now we read in 2 Peter chapter 2, it says that God delivered righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked, For that righteous man dwelling among them tormented his righteous soul from day to day by seeing and hearing their lawless deeds. And then it says in 2 Peter 2, verse 9, the Lord knows how to deliver or how to rescue the godly out of, depending on your translations, out of temptations or out of tribulation, and reserve the unjust under punishment for the day of judgment. The Lord knows how to rescue the righteous and the godly, while at the same time, I can rescue them and still give them the judgment they deserve. God knows how to do that. He's righteous. Abraham understood it, and God showed it to be true. 1, the pre-trib rapture view is the only comforting view. Number 2, the church isn't appointed to wrath. Number 3, it's not in God's nature to judge the righteous with the wicked. Number 4, and again, I hope I'm not like blowing your minds. Well, I hope I'm blowing them just a little bit, but number 4, Jesus said, no man knows the day or the hour. Matthew 24, verse 42 says, Jesus says, the angels don't know when I'm going to return. I don't even know when I'm going to return. Only the Father knows. No one knows the day or the hour. There's no other view that can say that. If you are a mid-trib or a pre-wrath or a post-trib, then you know because you know Revelations 11, 12, and 13, you know that once the Antichrist comes on the scene in the middle of the tribulation, he's going to waltz into the temple in Jerusalem and he's going to demand to be worshiped. It's called the abomination that causes desolation. And the Bible couldn't be more clear and more exacting on this. That when that event happens, that one singular event, 1,260 days later, or 42 months, or 3.5 years, however you want to view it, from the moment that happens, 3.5 years later, the second coming is going to take place and Jesus is going to return. So Daniel, Matthew, Luke, Revelation, they all speak of very clear signs. So we've read this, right? Clear signs that are going to take place before the second coming when Jesus comes to rule and reign. But you can't have an expectancy that Jesus could come at any moment like the Thessalonians did and we're called to if we're waiting for these other events to take place. Does that make sense? Like if we're waiting, the temple has to be built, the Antichrist has to come, and then we'll know the exact day. No, Jesus could come at any moment. That's the expectation that we're to have. Number 5, and this is related to number 4, the pre-trib view is the only view that keeps our focus on Jesus. Pre-wrath, post-trib, I'm not saying that this is the intent, but it can be really easy to start looking for the Antichrist instead of Jesus Christ. Because these other viewpoints, they all have to say that Jesus can't come back. He won't come back until after the Antichrist. The Antichrist has to come first, and then we go through part of the tribulation, the temple's built, all those things, there's earthquakes, oceans to blood, all of that takes place. And then we can start looking for the return of Jesus. That's not what we're called to. Only the pre-tribulation view is only looking for Jesus. As Pastor Isaac said last week, if you were here, there's nothing else that needs to take place before this happens. And that's the expectancy that we're called to have. Number 6, Old Testament typology, or pictures or models, whatever word you want to use there. Jesus said in Luke chapter 17, that when the Son of Man returns, it's going to be as in the days of Noah, and it's going to be as in the days of Lot. Now, certainly he's talking about like the socioeconomic and political situation in the world. It's going to be like that. All those things that we read about were going on in the world in Sodom and Gomorrah and in Noah's day, that's what it's going to be like. But also, both of those are pictures for us of a pre-trib rapture. We already drew the comparison of Lot. He was pulled out of the city before Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. And as you know with Noah, the entire earth was going to be flooded. Everyone except those 8 people were going to die, and they did. Now, this is where like a post-trib person would say, oh, you see there, that's Noah is a picture of us. And he lived through that and survived on the other end. But Noah isn't a picture of the church. He's a picture of the nation of Israel, of the 144,000 that we read about in Revelation, and I'll explain that why in a second. They go through the tribulation. The church isn't seen in Noah. The church is seen in another figure in that time frame, a man by the name of Enoch. If you remember, Enoch lived right before the flood, and it says that Enoch had Methuselah, and he started to walk with God. And that happens when you have kids, right? So it says Enoch walked with God, and he was no more because the Lord took him. And shortly thereafter, the flood began. And so there's all sorts of pictures in the Old Testament. One of my favorites is in Daniel chapter 3. Nebuchadnezzar is a picture of the Antichrist. He's forcing everyone to bow and worship this image that he's created, this image that happens to be 60 cubits high, 6 cubits wide, with 6 separate instruments playing around it, 666. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, as you know, they refuse to bow down and worship that. They're thrown into the fiery furnace, but the question is, where's Daniel? Where's Daniel in this? There's no way that Daniel bowed down to that image. We don't know. I'm not saying he was taken to heaven. He just wasn't there. It's a picture. It's a model for us. He was removed from that event. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these 3 young Jewish men, they go through the fiery furnace, through the fiery tribulation, that furnace which was heated, if you remember, 7 times hotter. They go through that, and you know what is amazing when they do? That's where they meet Jesus. Nebuchadnezzar looked in, as I see 4, and the 4th is like the Son of Man. That's a picture of what's going to happen to the nation of Israel in the tribulation period. They are going to finally, God's not done with them, Romans 11:25. They are going to meet and recognize the Messiah finally at that moment. Daniel chapter 3 is a great picture of that. All sorts of Old Testament pictures. Number 7. There's 33 of these, so I'm joking. Number 7. The church is not mentioned in the tribulation. The flow of the book of Revelation. Why don't you just turn there real quick. Revelation 1, verse 19. This is, if you've never, we've been able to study through the book of Revelation a couple times as a church. If you've never studied through it and you're interested in the book of Revelation, you need to get chapter 1, verse 19 down. Because in chapter 1, verse 19, John is told by Jesus, he's given an outline for the rest of the book. He's told, first of all, it says, write the things which you, number 1, have seen. And, number 2, the things which are. Number 3, and the things which will take place after this. Write the past, write the present, and write what's going to take place in the future. So, okay, that's the outline of the book. What do we have? The things you have seen? Well, that would take place before 1 verse 19, right? Okay, that's chapter 1. The things, it's the resurrected and glorified Jesus, the Alpha, the Omega, all of that, the incredible view we have. His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were a flaming fire. All of that is what he has seen, the resurrected and glorified Jesus Christ. Chapters 2 and 3, if you're there, you can just look at it with me. The things that are. It's the present church age. It's 7 letters to 7 churches. Here's the churches. Here's Jesus' letter to them. And then in chapter 4 and 5, John gives a glimpse of heaven, and the church is seen gathered around the throne. Chapter 6 through 19 is the tribulation. Chapter 20 is the millennium. Chapter 21 and 22 is the new heaven and the new earth, and we all live happily ever after. Now, the church, the word church, get this, guys, students, the word church is mentioned 19 times in the first 3 chapters. Okay? 19 times. But beginning in chapter 4, when the church is kind of seen around the throne, the word church is not mentioned again in the rest of the book. It's not in the flow of the tribulation. The church is there in the present, but when we get to this third part of the outline, the things that will be, the church isn't there. It's not mentioned. There's all sorts of things that we could talk about. Again, I believe that there's dozens upon dozens of reasons why this is the correct view to have this. Another great one is the 70th week of Daniel. I don't know if you guys have studied that prophecy. It's kind of they call it the backbone of Bible prophecy. If you can get that down, it helps piece everything together. Daniel's given this prophecy, and it says, Daniel, I'm giving you a prophecy of 70 weeks for your people. Daniel was a Jew. This was a prophecy for his people. There's a set of 69 of this, and then there's this 1 7-year period that's yet to come. It's called the time of Jacob, Israel's trouble. It's a prophecy, Daniel, for your people. The tribulation, it's for your people. It's not for the church. The church wasn't in the first 69 weeks. It's not in the 70th week of Daniel. We could talk about the picture that Jesus gave of a Jewish wedding being a picture of him coming for his bride and taking them up to heaven. It's so mind-blowing and incredible. There is a documentary on Amazon Prime right now called Before the Wrath, and it draws out all these incredible comparisons of a Jewish wedding and how that compares to the pre-tribulation rapture view, even from the bride being taken up into the air and brought to her groom. It's amazing. It'll blow your mind. We could talk about all of these things. There's so much evidence that we're going to get caught up and snatched up before the tribulation. But what does it matter? Why does this matter? If you would, before we close, turn to Matthew 24. I think it matters a great deal to have a pre-tribulation rapture view that Jesus could come at any moment. He could come now. He could come. The doctrine is called imminency. It's like any minute, see? Like he could, like any time. It matters because looking for the Lord, is our final point, promotes purity. Look with me at Matthew 24:42. Watch, this is Jesus speaking, words in red. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming, but know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore, you also be ready. Okay, the first instruction we had was watch. Now, be ready. Okay, why are we watching and being ready? End of verse 44. For the Son of Man is coming at an hour that you do not expect. Man, that's why you got to be watching. That's why you got to be ready. And then verse 45, in light of that truth, who then is a faithful and wise servant whom his master made rule over his household to give him food in due season? Blessed, verse 46, is the servant whom his master, when he comes, will find him so doing. Doing what? Watching, waiting, being ready. Verse 47, assuredly, Jesus says, I say to you that I'll make him ruler over all his goods. But if that evil servant, and I need to tell you this about this word evil here, it's not evil like just, utterly wicked. The word evil here is like out of tune, like what once was right, but now isn't viewing things correctly. It's like an instrument that Chris is up here with his guitar, and maybe the D string or something is just out of tune. That's what this word evil means. So if that out of tune servant wasn't quite right, he's there, but he's just not quite right, says in his heart, my master's delaying his coming. Look what he does. And he begins to beat his fellow servants and eat and drink with the drunkards. The master of that servant will come on a day when he's not looking for him, and an hour that he's not aware of, and will cut him in two and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Jesus says no man knows the hour, so this could be the hour. And every generation of Christians is called to live with this type of expectancy. It's not a mistake that Jesus said this 2,000 years ago. I was like, oh, they got it wrong. Or those Thessalonians, man, in 57 AD, they were ready for Jesus. It wasn't a mistake because it caused them to live the life that Jesus wanted them to live. It caused them to live with their eyes focused on Lord. As we sang before, our eyes are focused on you. That's what it causes. And so the faithful servant, he's ready. He's waiting. When's the master going to return? The out-of-tune servant, on the other hand, says, my Lord delays his coming. Notice, the out-of-tune, the evil servant, isn't saying there is no Lord. Oh, he believes there's a Lord. He isn't saying, he's not coming. He believes he's coming. The evil servant, the out-of-tune servant says, he delays his coming. One of the greatest lies that the enemy can get us to believe, especially young people, is not that there's not a heaven or a hell. Those are outrageous lies, but one of the most damaging is that there's no hurry. That you don't have to be ready at any moment for the master to return. And so here, man, the evil servant, he's not coming back today. You know, the Antichrist has to reveal himself. The temple needs to be built. Those mountains are still standing. The evil servant says, he ain't coming today. So what does he do? It says he beats his fellow servants, and he's drinking and getting drunk. He's not expecting the Lord to return at any moment. And that viewpoint where there's no imminency, like, there's no rush. Jesus, not today. People have been saying this for 2,000 years. That causes in him a propensity to brutality and carnality. I'm going to start mistreating my fellow servants. Like, there's no reason why not to, you know? But what happens is the exact opposite thing happens for you and I, for the Christian who says, Jesus could come at any moment. And here, I want you to mark down, you don't need to turn there. 1 John 3 says, we know, we believers, we know that when Jesus is revealed, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And everyone who has this hope in him, not in yourself, but his hope in him, purifies himself. You're not getting drugged into brutality and carnality. You're purifying yourself just as he is pure. The Bible instructs us over and over and over again in the New Testament alone to be ready, to be watching, to be waiting. Jesus said, look up, for your redemption draws nigh. It could be today. And anticipating our Savior's return, that at just any moment he could say, come up here. When that's our attitude, it's going to affect how we treat our fellow servants. It's going to keep us from falling back into these fleshy behaviors that we're all so prone to do. It keeps us on fire to witness and to serve. If I'm truly looking that the Lord could come back by noon, it's 1:45, he could come back by noon, or he could come back this afternoon, or whatever, you know, it's going to affect how I treat my wife. That's not rocket surgery, right? It's going to affect, I do that on purpose. A couple of you got it. It's going to affect how you interact with the people you work with around the water cooler or under the hood or whatever. It's going to affect that interaction. It's going to create an urgency in you to share with that person that's been depending upon their own good works. That's not depending completely and fully on Jesus Christ. That's doing their own thing. That's caught up in the world. It's going to create in you. Jesus could come back. You need to get this. You need to understand this for yourself, and you need to be saved. It calls us into the life that we're called to live. The Lord is coming for his people. Are you ready? Now, maybe you're like, I was really hoping to get married first. Or I'm expecting, I want to, have the joy of having a baby, or, I'm going to Cancun or something. I'd like to, trust me, Cancun is not as good as seeing the Savior face to face. I understand those sentiments, I've been there, but we really don't understand how mind-blowing, beyond comprehension, and amazing it would be to be in the presence of Jesus. And this is why, when we wrap our mind around that, and that's a truth and that's a reality, and it could happen at any moment, then we have this attitude that the early church had, that their greeting with one another was Maranatha. Come soon, Lord Jesus. I am ready. I'm ready for you because I've been looking for you. Amen? Let's pray.